Hello everybody and welcome to our seminar for today on coping during COVID. I see that plenty of you are dialing in. We'll just give you a minute or so more before we kick off. Okay, as everybody's dialing in, I will get started. We've got an hour and it promises to be a very interesting hour. So I'm delighted to welcome everyone today to our first Channel Islands event. I'm Catherine Torrode. I'm the chair of the Channel Islands IWFM committee, and we're absolutely delighted to have so many people dialing in, both from the islands and further afield. When we decided to run this seminar, when we were working on the topics for 2021's programme last year, I don't think we ever thought we'd still be caught up in the pandemic a year down the line. In the islands, and especially in the bailiwick, we've been incredibly lucky to have enjoyed far less time under restrictions than a lot of other places. But even as we emerge from our own lockdowns, we have noticed, I think particularly, that the second lockdown was even tougher than the first one. That's certainly true from colleagues and friends that I've been speaking to. Home working isn't a new concept, but in the past it tended to be more of a conscious decision, a choice, and of course with COVID it was pretty much thrust upon us. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay, and while the debate of home versus office in terms of what is the best workspace still rumbles on, today's speakers are here to provide practical advice and guidance on how to manage it well, bearing in mind that it's just one of many things that we're all having to juggle at the moment. IT always seems to be the thing that people look at first, but your home setup and your mental well-being is as critical for your longer term physical and mental health as much as the IT is. We've all had that I'll sort it out tomorrow moment, so today we hope that with the advice that we're providing you with, you'll take just a little bit of time to do a self-check and a prompt, and take a little bit of time for yourselves as well. So we have three fantastic speakers today, so I'd like to introduce them to you. First up will be Grant Henderson. He's chiropractor and office ergonomics consultant with over 30 years experience. He's the founder of Active Chiropractic Clinic in Jersey with his wife Penny. One of the things they both noticed as COVID hit us was people needed more support through the online portals, so they've created self-training videos for office workers, switching to the working from home routine, and they've also set up some online ergonomic training resources, which are proving very popular with employees to help support their teams as they work from home. Then we'll be switching to Hugo Forrester. He's operations manager for Mind Jersey. After a career in aviation that spanned 15 years, he decided that he wanted to switch to a role that would encompass his true values of compassion, support, curiosity and connection. He now thrives as the operations manager for Mind Jersey and as a mental health first aid instructor. In this role, he pursues work based on the theory of minority stress and how occupying a minority group can affect someone's mental health, having experienced the challenges of living as a man of a transgender experience. He's passionate and dedicated to ensure that no marginalised community is left behind in the work that Mind Jersey undertake. And our third presenter today is Beth Moore. She's the Executive Officer of Jersey Recovery College, which is a local mental health charity that provides free courses to those experiencing mental health and difficulties and the people who support them. JRC has supported over 1,000 local people since opening in 2017. Their courses span recovery, mental illness, wellbeing and life skills. Each course is delivered by two trainers, one who has professional expertise in the subject matter and the other who has lived through experience of mental illness and recovery. Prior to setting up JRC, Beth was a trustee for Mind Jersey and also ambassador, and she's also worked in the past for Macmillan Jersey and in London for a global PR company. She was named Inspirational Leader of the Year in 2018's Pride of Jersey Awards and named on the Independent's Happy List of 2019. So before we start, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all of our presenters for volunteering their time today and sharing their practical advice and expertise with us. And I will now hand over to Grant for you to run through your presentation. Thank you, Grant.
Thanks very much indeed, Catherine, for that introduction. That's really, that's very helpful and gives everyone a context for what we're going to be talking about. So if I could have the first slide, please. So just really, that's just who I am. And as Catherine rightly said, I've been practicing for over 30 years as a chiropractor and 25 years as well as a workstation assessor. And in that time, I've done thousands of workstation assessments with many, many different people. So particularly workstation assessments for financial and legal companies within the Channel Islands. And I've worked with dozens of FMs across the islands. Next slide, please. So really trying to get a sense of, this is obviously very familiar for most of you, I'm sure. This is the way things were. And for many of you, we possibly still working in that kind of office. And in those offices, you would have a good sort of health and safety environment. You would have regular checkups as the FM. You would be able to wander around, check up on people, and if there were issues, then next slide, please. If there were issues, it's like a pain in the neck, perhaps, then you would know what to do. So in this case, I'm sure you can spot the issues. So the gentleman there needs to raise the screen up, so you need to fix that, and preferably provide him with a neck rest for his chair and maybe give him some advice about his posture. Next slide again, please. Thank you. So this is, kind of a bit more up to date. This is more of an up to date office setup. So nice, bright, light, shiny office. The contract desking there and the ergonomic chairs, I think, will be familiar to most of you. And in this sort of context here, now you would have not only just your only little on-site workstation assessments, but also if there were people with major issues, you would get someone in to give you some support. And this is, obviously how things ran until fairly recently. And so next slide again, please. And so you would have a few standing up desks for people. That's become very popular here, and I'm sure it's the case wherever you're watching this from. And again, please, with the slide. Thank you. And the hot desking also is very much a feature that we're seeing creeping in here, but I think in the UK it's much more common. And I think that's something that will change in the future. So everything was going well. So next slide, please. Certainly you had a setup, and then suddenly this happened. So March 2020, a date we're never going to forget, I don't think. Everything suddenly stopped. So businesses had to send their workers home, in many cases virtually overnight, or certainly over a weekend. And there are immediate issues with connectivity. That was perhaps the big one to start off with, and then getting the kit to people. And many people then started working all day with just a laptop. And then the homeschooling, of course, started as well. So next slide, please. And this kind of thing was starting to happen. So hopefully that's raising a few smiles, and some of you might even recognize yourselves or colleagues in that circumstance. Because, and next slide again, please. Because that home sort of working and homeschooling is a difficult one to balance. I'm just going to tilt the screen down a tiny bit. It's very difficult to balance, isn't it? And I think people really struggled. And initially we all coped, but then as the situation carried on for longer, then everybody's stress levels really started to increase. And you can see this guy's posture is not great, so he's leaning over his laptop there. So next slide again, please. And so this became the new normal. People would often, homeschool during the day and then maybe work in the evenings. So there's the guy sitting there at his kitchen table, laptop on the table, not the best posture, unfortunately. And then very quickly, what would happen was, if you go to the next slide, please, he'd be just crashed out. He just burned out. He's fallen asleep at the desk. And this happened, we found, next slide again, please. We found that we would start to get a lot of reports about this. So come sort of April, May, June last year, lots and lots of people were getting in touch with us. And as Catherine kindly said, we produced some very simple homemade videos just to give people some advice. And then we produced sort of a more professional one, which we're now sharing with our ergonomic clients in the Channel Islands. And just, in terms of the statistics, you can see those statistics on the screen there. 5% of people, 2019, 5% of people work from home, but then by October 2020, October last year, that number was up to 71%. That's a massive, massive change, not only in the actual numbers, but think about the impact on those people's lifestyles. And out of those people that were surveyed there, so it's over 1,000 people surveyed in that study for the Institute of Employment Studies, they found more than 55% reported new musculoskeletal issues, and that's a huge, huge number. So moving on quickly to the next one, please. This is the statistics here in more detail. 75% of people have not had a home working assessment, and I think that's really concerning number, because obviously, going back to what we were saying before, as facilities managers, in the normal way of things, you could easily help and support your colleagues. Everybody had the same desk or the same chair, give or take, so it's quite easy to sort things out. But now everyone's different. So what we're going to do next is to give you some simple ideas, so ways to just support your colleagues. So a few tricks and tips from my experience. So next slide again, please. So in the early days, people working on the sofa, obviously that's going to mean a pain in the neck. And so moving on to the next slide, please. Key rule with laptops is don't use them on your lap. I don't know who came up with that name. Really, they need to change that name completely. So use the laptop on the table. Ideally, use it with a separate mouse and keyboard, and then raise the laptop up so you've actually got the screen at your eye height. Next slide, please. So I couldn't find a picture of someone with a load of books under their laptop, which is what most people seem to do. But you can get these nice laptop supports. Again, next slide, thank you. So kitchen chairs obviously featured in some of the earlier pictures, and I think people, even now a year later, still sitting on the kitchen chair. Obviously, the obvious thing is to make sure that you've got a padded seat, but also good trick with a hard back chair is to put a pillow, just an ordinary pillow from your bed, vertically behind you, because what you want to do is to try to get people to lean back in the chair. If they're upright like that and they start leaning forward, that's going to start hurting very quickly. Also, we found people were able to touch the ground, so use a book or a box as a footrest is always a good trick. Next slide, please. So then, changing your posture, I just touched on that just now. So the worst kind of posture for your back is this leaning forward posture, because it puts a lot of strain. So from your shoulder blade all the way up to the back of your head. So people start getting very sore necks and headaches, but also puts more pressure on the lower back there. So what we encourage people to do is lean back in the chair. So make sure, this applies in the office as well, make sure that you've got a setup where you can actually lean back against the backrest of the chair. So next slide, please. So there you can see, I know it's an office setup. Again, I couldn't find one that was for a home setup, because going back to what we said, they're all different. So in the office, try and encourage your colleagues to sit back in the chair with the backrest against the back of their shoulders. And the same applies at home as much as you can. So next slide again, please. Next thing is to try and get some movement in, have some nice stretches. These slides, of course, you will have available for you at the end of the webinar, so you will be able to refer back to these. But I thought these were a really nice, easy set of things. You could do them sitting down, standing up, whatever works best for you. And next slide, thank you. Also very important to take a break. And this is something that we really find difficult to get over to people sometimes when they're under pressure, they've got deadlines maybe, that it really helps you to take that break away from work, and that will really help increase your productivity. So a couple of active breaks a day if you possibly can. Have a little walk outside, maybe if it's wet, try some online yoga or Pilates or stretching or something of that kind, and that should really help. So next slide again, thank you. So this kind of thing you can actually do in the home, as you can see. So there's all sorts of different stuff around there, so you could make up your own workout. You can do that whether you're at home or in the office even. You could potentially do that when we all start to get back into the offices. So a bit of a canter through that, because I know we're a little bit pressed for time, but thanks very much for listening. Next slide, final slide, thank you. And then if you want to get in touch with me to get more information about that, or just to look at our webinars and our blogs and so forth, then please look on these links. Thanks a lot. Goodbye. So handing back to Catherine. There we go.
Thank you, Grant. That was great. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to everybody as well that if you do have questions, if you can put them on the chat, please. And then once all of our three guest presenters have run through their presentations, we'll go to a Q&A session. And just a reminder as well that the whole session is being recorded, so at the end of the event we'll be sending out the link so everybody can refer back to it, and obviously the slides. So next up we have Hugo Forrester, who's the operations manager for Mind Jersey. Hugo, over to you.
Hello everyone. I was just doing my stretches there. I don't know about you, but Grant got me shuffling in my chair, and I absolutely do not have my laptop on some books. I'll be addressing that later. So my name's Hugo and I'm the operations manager at Mind Jersey, and Grant's given us a great start by talking about our physical health and the impact of COVID and lockdown and working from home on our physical health, which leads us perfectly into what I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. A little bit about us. I'll leave you read this, and please take a look at our website, mindjersey.org. But the bottom line is we are a mental health charity. We're supporting people with any level of issue with their mental health, whether they are just struggling a little bit, they have got poor mental health, deteriorating mental health, or a severe and enduring mental illness. And what we have seen over the last 12 months is a huge demand in our services and people looking for support. So let's drill down into what are we talking about when we talk about mental health. Next slide, please. It's been a bit of a topic, a visible topic of conversation over the last 12 months. Well-being, mental health, coping, stress. But what do we actually mean? What is mental health? Do you immediately think about green smoothies and yoga? Do you immediately think about really severe mental illness? What does it mean to you? So let's work it out. It's part of our overall health. Our physical health relates to our bodies and our mental health relates to our minds. That might seem simple, but are we educated and knowledgeable about our mental health the same way we are as our physical health? Are we taught how to look after it and invest in it as we grow up? Our mental health is a good barometer of our general health, and it's shown by the way we think, the way we feel, and therefore the way we behave and respond to people. It's how we cope with the ups and downs of everyday life, which of course the last 12 months has thrown us a bit of a curveball. And it's about how we feel about ourselves, about our life, and about the future. And that's part of what the pandemic has done. It's made us a bit uncertain about the future. What's going to come next? What are the restrictions going to be like? Can we book our holidays? What is our future going to be like? Poor mental health is very common because we all have minds. The pre-pandemic statistics was 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem each year. We expect that to be far greater for the last 12 months. But recovery from poor mental health is entirely likely and possible with the right supports in place, and there's plenty of support out there. So let's differentiate. Mental health can be really good, and we'll look at more of that in a minute. It can be poor. You can have a period of poor mental health, or you can be experiencing a mental illness or a diagnosis. That is very different to mental illness, which is where you are in a state of mental ill health. And again, this is different to well-being. When we talk about well-being, we are talking about a holistic approach to our entire selves, and that will be a combination of both mental health and physical health. So we all have mental health, just as we all have physical health. It can fluctuate over the course of our lifetime depending on what is happening. And in relevance to the pandemic, we've seen that a lot of people have faced challenges of varying degrees, and there's been varying degrees of the way people have responded to that. So next slide, please. One definition of mental health is this by the Health and Education Authority. It's quite an old definition and there's plenty out there, but it's one that I like. The emotional and spiritual resilience, we've heard a lot of that word as well, which allows us to enjoy life, survive pain, disappointment, and sadness. Usual things in life that we're going to experience. It's a positive sense of well-being and an underlying belief in our own and others' dignity and worth. So that's really about believing in ourselves, believing in other people, regardless of the state of their mental health, and allowing people who might be going through a period of poor mental health that support, but also opportunities and privileges that perhaps historically we might not have given out. Next slide, please. This is the key message right here. What happens when an aeroplane is in difficulty? The advice is, please put your oxygen mask on first before you start helping anybody else. Self-care is not selfish. Investing in your self-care, investing in looking after your physical and your mental health is not selfish. If you do not make time for your physical and your mental health, you're likely to be forced to make time for your illness. And Grant has shown that as well, that that those physical manifestations of stress and poor posture and things working from home have contributed to an increase in physical illness. Next slide, please. So what does self-care look like to you? Okay, it's going to be different for everyone. There's going to be lots of elements to it. Here's just a few examples, but take into consideration, really look at what helps you metabolize your daily stresses and about how you manage your stress in a healthy or unhealthy way. Address any unhealthy coping strategies like drugs or alcohol or withdrawing, shutting down. Try and address those and look out for those support things, but also investing in these things that we've got here: physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. And what's good for one person won't be good for another. Last slide, please. Top tips. Learn to understand about your emotional health. Learn to check in with yourself. Learn your signs of stress. What do your signs of stress and burnout look like? And get in there quickly. Practice self-care, whatever that looks like for you. Ask for help or support early, because recovery can happen more quickly and easier. And remember that recovery from poor mental health is likely and possible with the right supports in place. Thank you so much for your time.
Hugo, brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Some really good thought-provoking ideas there for people to think about. And you're absolutely right. Looking after yourself is not selfish at all. And I think, if anything, the last year has shown us that we really need to be doing that. So great tips there. Thank you so much. Right, moving swiftly on, we're going to catch up with Beth from the Jersey Recovery Centre. So Beth, please take the slides to us.
Hello, hi, thank you for having me. Next slide, please. So Jersey Recovery College, we're a local mental health charity in Jersey. We support people with their mental health, with well-being, and with recovery through the power of education. That's what we do. From a personal perspective, I will be drawing on some of my experiences today. I've had mental illness myself. I've had episodes of poor mental health. I've had mental illness in the workplace. I've experienced recovery. I've also experienced supporting very close loved ones with their mental illness. And in a professional capacity, I support a team, and that involves helping support their mental health as well. So I'm hoping that I can share some of those insights with you today, and hopefully that will be helpful. This first image here is where I'd like to start, really, and it's talking about the principles of supporting somebody with their mental health. So my topic today is really how we can support others. I took this picture back in January on a walk. I was in a pretty bad place at the time. My mental health wasn't very good, and the weather felt even more awful than I did, I think, that day. Just before this picture was taken, it was blowing a hoolie, and the rain was so hard on my face that it actually hurt. And I was feeling dreadful. And then within the moment, the sky split open, the sun came out, and this rainbow appeared. And it was such a powerful moment to me that it made me cry. They were happy tears, because I felt hope. It was like a real bolt of hope. And hope is one of the greatest gifts that we can give anybody experiencing mental health problems, because it really is the thing that gives us the strength to move forward. Next slide, please. And what hope works towards really is what Hugo touched on a moment ago, is really believing in recovery and believing that things will get better. Because when you're in a very dark place, sometimes you can see no light. And I love this quote from one of our directors that says that recovery is a journey out of darkness and towards light. Because even if that light is nothing more than the smallest chink in the future that you can see, and it looks like it's a million miles away, if you have hope that you can get there, you will have the strength to take the next step forward. So as someone that's supporting someone with their mental health, if you can provide hope and you can really champion recovery, you are giving that person a huge gift. So try and remember those principles. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk through some tips now of things that will hopefully be practical and helpful if you are supporting someone with their mental health, whether that's at home or in the workplace. The first thing is about how you receive that information. So if somebody comes to you and opens up from a vulnerable place, the first thing to remember is they probably don't want you to fix them. As much as you will feel like they do, they probably don't. At that moment, they probably just want you to hear them. So if you can try and remember to meet somebody with compassionate presence instead of solutions, that will go a really long way. So the first thing to remember is to listen well. And what we mean by that is to truly listen. Very often we listen to respond. In this model, we listen to hear what somebody's saying. So we listen non-judgmentally, even if we've heard this before, and we avoid distractions and we try and be fully present. And one of the tools that you can use to demonstrate to somebody that you have heard them is to validate what they have said. And you can do this by repeating back what they've said to you, paraphrasing it and giving it back to them. You can ask clarifying questions. You can acknowledge how terrible it must be for them and what they're going through. And if you can use those tips and really make somebody believe that you've heard them, they will really begin to trust you and they will be soothed by your presence. And sometimes all you need to do is sit in silence with someone. But yeah, that's my first tip, is there are ways that you can provide hope for people that are around solutions. But actually, when someone's opening up for you, try and avoid the need to fix them and just really focus on listening and hearing them and letting them know that you have. Next slide, please. And my second tip is, this is useful in your personal life, but also in the workplace. I'll talk about it from the workplace perspective first. We have, at Jersey Recovery College, we have wellbeing management plans for all our members of staff. And these are plans that we put in place and we return to them at regular intervals, but they're also incredibly helpful if someone becomes unwell. It's best to write them when someone is in quite a good place. And they cover various things. The first thing that we cover is how do you stay well? And that's really helpful because generally that's a list of really positive habits that people have to look after their own mental health. And when our mental health starts to suffer, usually those things slip away. So if we can be reminded of them, then it encourages us to kind of embrace them again. We look at what the triggers are in the workplace and outside of the workplace, and this can be quite helpful as a manager to know what someone's triggers are because they might be things that aren't obvious to us. So for instance, somebody might really struggle with winter because of the dark days. Somebody might struggle with working in an open plan office because of the noise and the distraction. There will be all sorts of things for people that can trigger their poor mental health or cause them additional stress. And if we know what they are, we can work with them. We then have a plan within the plan that outlines 3 steps that we can each take if somebody becomes unwell. So that is what the employee will do if they become unwell and what we will do as the employer or as the manager. And we agree to those in advance. And the final thing, and this is particularly helpful if somebody experiences quite severe illness, would be around consent to share your concerns. It's a terrible place to be as an employer or as a loved one, actually, if somebody is really struggling and you feel you can't take that anywhere because you're protecting their confidentiality. So if you can agree in advance, a nominated person, whether that would be a mental health professional, a GP, or maybe a family member, that is in agreement, you're all in agreement, everybody signs the consent form, that should you be concerned about a colleague's mental health, that you have somewhere to take that concern. And that really is a very helpful thing for everybody. So that's my second tip, is make a plan. Third slide, please. Next slide, sorry. The next thing is about signposting and education. So this is a great way to provide hope for people, actually, because it is about helping people realize that there is a lot of help and support out there, and there's a lot that we can do for ourselves. So if I start on the education side of things first, you know, that's what we do at JRC, but if we can give people the tools to understand their own experience and to understand the things and strategies they can put in place to manage their own well-being, then we are empowering people to take a step forward. If we're supporting somebody and we can educate ourselves on their experience, we will have more understanding of what they're going through. So education is really important. Signposting is equally important. There are lots of services out there, and often you won't know where to start. You know, we usually tell people that the first point of call is their GP, but there are so many other services that we can point people towards. In Jersey, we have something called the Mental Health Network. That is a website that you can look up, and it lists all of the services, mental health services here. The Hub of Hope is a UK app that is regional. So you type in your region and it will bring up a list of services where you are. Now, even if that list of services means nothing to you, it's a starting point. So if you are supporting someone and you have a list of services at your fingertips, but you don't know where to start, I would recommend just calling one of the services and asking for their advice. In the Mental Health Network, we say that if you find one of us, you find all of us. So if you contact any of the agencies on that list, we will be able to guide you as to the best services that could help that person. So you don't have to fix someone yourself. You know, there are services out there, and there's lots of really excellent services that can support. Next slide, please. And Hugo's touched on it, Grant's touched on it, the importance of taking care of yourself. So we can't pour from an empty cup. And as somebody that has been through mental illness myself and has supported a very close loved one with their mental illness, I don't know which is harder, actually. They're both fairly horrible places to be. But I do know that I couldn't take care of my loved one if I wasn't taking care of myself. So that is super important. And if you're in the workplace and you're supporting someone, make sure that there is somewhere you can take your experience of that support, so that you're supported yourself. Next slide, please. So as organisations, thinking more at a macro level, there's lots that we can do to support people with their mental health and well-being in the workplace. And sometimes I have a little joke. It's maybe not a very funny joke, but I'm not a very jokey person often. But sometimes with organisations, I will joke that if their return to work policy doesn't accommodate that squiggle, they need to redo their return to work policy. I'm definitely no comedian, but there is some truth in it in terms of the fact that your policies really need to be fit for purpose around managing mental health in the workplace. And often a health and safety policy and a return to work policy is focused on physical health. So making sure that policies are really fit for purpose around mental health is important. Making sure that your company has some infrastructure around support systems, both for individuals who are struggling and people who are supporting those individuals. You know, if you've got mental health first aiders, Jersey offers mental health first aid, which is excellent. If you've got first aiders in your organisation, they need to be supported as well. So there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place and thinking. And really it all comes down to having a mental health strategy. Next slide, please. And often organisations don't really know where to start. And we've created a training program that may be of interest that helps train up everybody in organizations, from senior leaders thinking about strategy through to line managers thinking about supporting people, through to colleagues and employees supporting themselves and each other, and creating really mentally healthy workplaces and cultures of compassion. So if it's of interest, get in touch. You'll find our information on our website. And that's it. Final slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. That was really great and very thought-provoking. And I think it's very true, isn't it? You know, people sometimes want to ask for help but don't know where to look, or are just worried of the stigma of actually asking for help in the first place, which is probably one of the hardest things to get over. If all of our panelists could come back online with their videos, please. We've had a few questions through on the chat function while we've been doing your presentations. So I'm going to run through these now and try and find the suitable person to ask them, or answer them rather. So we've got a question from Vicky, which may be suitable for you, Grant, to provide some input on, but obviously anybody can chip in. How can we ensure that organisations are supporting with the correct home setup?
Wow, that's a really, really good one. Oh, an echo there. I don't know whether you're getting an echo. I think it's crucial, and there are resources out there. We've got our one, which I mentioned earlier on, but there are also online resources. And I think, you know, the dilemma for facilities managers is that you have a duty of care, even if your employee, your colleague, isn't actually in the workplace. They're still working for the company, therefore you still have a duty of care. So you need to ensure that their workstation is correctly set up. And probably a simple, I'm sure you could draw up as an easy way of doing this, just a simple questionnaire, just to get some feedback. And then if people have issues, that's when you need to intervene. I hope that answers the question.
Hopefully, yeah, seems to make sense, doesn't it? It's difficult, isn't it? Because once you're not in the office, that whole mechanism needs to be something totally different, doesn't it, for the employer to understand what is happening at home and also to provide that guidance to their employees, not just on the physical side of it. And that's probably one of the hardest things to do, because you can put the information out there, but how do you then monitor that they're following it and doing what they need to do? So yeah.
What you could do, sort of a weekly or monthly check-in, just to check whether people are okay. That would be another way to do it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was doing daily ones with my team, but it was needed, and that's what we wanted to do, because you have to agree what your frequency is. So yeah, that's definitely right. I have read stuff in the past as well about home working checklists, and I think that's a whole question, as Beth touched on, in terms of policies and procedures. You know, now that home working is no longer, you know, the unknown quantity, it's very much a known quantity. And while this whole debate rumbles on around which is the best workspace to be used and will you go back into the office, I think a lot of companies who haven't had this as listed in their policies and procedures are going to have to take time to look into it, because there's a whole raft of issues that come up as a result of it. So yeah, yeah, definitely. Hugo, I've got a question here for you from Paul. What do you think is the largest barrier to helping to people asking for help?
The stigma surrounding reaching out for help, particularly for men, the kind of pressures of expectations of roles and life, and the discussion around mental health. You know, it's a relatively new discussion around that ability to reach out, and it not being a shameful or a sign of weakness. So I think it's the general perception, but remember that can also be self-stigma. You know, that kind of what we grow up with, our expectations, so our own barriers, because there is lots of support out there for people waiting with open arms to even just, if you say, you know, I'm having a really bad time at the moment, you know, before things get really bad. People tend to wait really long for mental health. It's been very reactive in the past. People tend to wait till they are in burnout or in meltdown or having a breakdown before reaching out. So just encourage early support and to really keep check on that. And there's no shame in reaching out.
Beth, would you like to add anything?
I think Hugo's touched on most of it. Actually, it is generally stigma is what prevents people. In the workplace, I think it can be not knowing who to go to. So if there's no clarity around what the support systems are and the people that you can take those concerns to, then that can be a barrier for people.
All right, Hugo, I've got one for you actually. You're obviously a mental health first aid instructor. How well do you think companies have dealt with the fact that, you know, you've got your traditional first aiders in the workplace, but what proportion do you think companies have got in terms of mental health first aiders, and you know, how well are they along with that?
We're getting there. Mental Health First Aid England are aiming to train 1 in 10 people worldwide. It's a huge global kind of community interest company. We are well behind in relation to physical first aid, basically because of the lack of policy and support, policy and procedures around mental health in the workplace. But it's, as I said, the conversation is becoming more visible and more important. Employers are realizing the importance of looking after employees' mental health. And so we are seeing, you know, we have good attendance at our courses, and they are very well received. And when people start coming, generally companies are sending people back to do more. But it's definitely part of a holistic approach to wellbeing in the workplace.
Yeah, brilliant. Question for Beth. How do you support someone if they don't think they need it?
Yeah, this is hard. And actually, from my experience, I don't know if you find the same, Hugo, but when people start to become unwell, often there is quite a high degree of denial that is happening, which is why planning in advance is really helpful. So whether that's the wellbeing management plan I spoke about in the workplace, in my personal life, I use something called a traffic light plan, which it's not rocket science. I've kind of got green, amber, and red depending on where my mood is at, and green is good, red is really bad. And you kind of list what behaviors and what feelings might be associated with each of those kind of phases, and what you're going to do about it and what your loved ones can do about it. And that's really helpful for me and my family. And so in your personal life, that might be something that people can look at, but you do need to do that when you're feeling maybe better. It's difficult to do that kind of thing when you're actually in the thick of it. So yeah, if you can get a plan in place first with somebody, that's a really useful thing to do. If you haven't got that and somebody is obviously starting to struggle, but is in denial or won't ask for help, then you just need to be there and be there as compassionately as you can be, and encourage where you can that individual to get help without kind of directing them too much, because it's an individual choice. And if you really are concerned, go and speak to agencies yourself or speak to your GP. And if you think there is a professional route that needs to be followed, then initiate that happening. But it's a very difficult place to be, and it's a very common place to be, actually. If somebody is starting to become unwell, often they might be in denial that it's happening, which is really tough.
Yeah, definitely. Right, okay, that's lovely. Thank you, Beth. Grant, there's a question here from Alicia. What's your recommendation for layout and anything else when working on more than 2 screens?
Okay, so basic question you need to ask yourself, first of all, is if you've got multiple screens, 2 is common, but sometimes I've seen 3 or 4 or even 6 sometimes, is where possible, the screen that you use most is the one that you need to be facing. Simple as that. So if you have a secondary screen, then have that to one side. But if you use your screens equally, then bring them together as close as you can and line up that join between the two screens with the middle of your keyboard. And that will give you equal. So otherwise you're always tilting your head or twisting your head from one side to the other. And what we commonly see with home workstations is people will have been supplied with a monitor by their work, and then they may be working from a laptop as well. So the monitor's here in the correct position, and then the laptop's down there or in front of them, so it's all in the wrong place. So the same tip that I had before, excuse me, was just to get the screens up at the same height. But the one that you use most is the one you need in front of you. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice, and I think also it's probably equally as important, that kind of advice, when you're in the office, particularly where you've got desks that you've got dual screens and you've got one single monitor arm and they're not angled right, and it's getting them right, isn't it? That's the main thing before you end up with the same kind of issues. Yeah, definitely. I've got another one here, which is, I think I'll open up to the floor, as it were, although it was directed to Grant. It's the question about, from your experience, what do you think? Do you think people are more productive working from home? So that opens up the whole debate of office versus home working and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to get each of your views on that, on what you think is good or bad.
Okay, shall I go first on that? Just a minute. I think it really depends a lot on the individual. First of all, I mean, all of this is about the individual, making sure that individual is supported and that the environment they're working in, wherever they are, is as comfortable and as healthy as it is for them. It was mentioned earlier on that for some people, they don't enjoy working in a noisy office environment. They're much better working at home. The drawback with working from home is that you've got no interruptions. So some people like that, but then you've got no one to talk to. So that's not really always going to be very healthy. So for me, I would say the ideal, if possible, if your circumstances allow that, is to split your time. So this concept of agile working. So spending some time at work, some time at home, if that's your, if that works for you. So a lot of people are doing sort of 2 days at home, 3 days at work. But some people like to be in work the whole time. Some people want to be at home the whole time. And I think employers, as you rightly pointed out earlier on, Catherine, we're just going to have to be a lot more agile and just adapt to this new circumstance, because this is going to be with us, this working from home, that's going to be, that's going to be the norm, I think, from now onwards.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
That's my take on it.
Hugo?
Grant, yeah, I'd echo the individuality of the situation. We're all wonderfully diverse and different. And, we've seen, as the mental health charity, a huge range of responses to the pandemic and working from home. It suits some people, it doesn't work others, depending on the situation. But one of the key areas of challenge for people has been the implementing the boundaries and the routine, the disruption to routine. It's so easy when you're working from home not to shut the laptop at 5 o'clock and step away from it, or to wake up early or to go to bed late, and those are the things that over time will really be detrimental to our health and well-being.
Definitely,
yeah, definitely. I think I've found that, especially almost you're sometimes almost expected to work longer hours when you're working from home because your employer perhaps doesn't have the visibility, but then that comes down to trust, doesn't it? And knowing your staff and knowing that you will do the job at the right time, but giving you that flexibility. And I think some employers still struggle with allowing staff the flexibility to do the work and just focus on, well, you're not in the office, therefore you can't be doing it as well. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't suit every person. It doesn't suit every role either. Beth, do you have any thoughts on it?
I think that, yeah, it definitely suits some individuals better than others, but I think everybody by this stage of where we're at with COVID is struggling with a lack of connectivity with other people, and the screen just doesn't quite cut it. So we've seen different people struggle with it at different stages, but I think what we've got to now is the point where everybody's really sick of it, and it's nice to have it as an option. And I think it's really great that it will be more, that flexible working will be more normalized, because it is so helpful for so many of us when it's something that we choose. But when it's enforced on us, as a few people have said today, it can be really demotivating. And employers need to be mindful of that people are working at the moment under quite a grey cloud of motivation. It's really difficult for people to be motivated right now, and people are feeling disconnected. And if there's ways that you can encourage connection, even if it does have to be virtual, but ideally, you know, arrange a walk outside with your team or something where people can actually see each other face to face, that'll go a long way, because everybody is finding it hard now, I think.
Yes, I think definitely the fact that the second lockdown has been when it hasn't been, it's been slightly earlier in the year. Certainly over here, I think the comment has been that everybody struggled a bit more with it, even though we went back into that routine quite quickly, because, you know, in Guernsey we had that second lockdown really suddenly. So, you know, we're really grateful that, you know, we're now out of it and we can get everybody back. But there's also that adjustment afterwards as well, isn't there, where you're all coming back into the office and you've got to readapt again. So, I mean, the human person is quite a versatile and resilient person, but I think that the pandemic has pushed our resilience and our versatility to the hilt. And I think, you know, responsible employers, you know, have got to spend more time thinking about their staff and how they support them. And you're absolutely right, checking in on people during the time, however much they might not like being on a video call or stuff like that, you can still make it fun, can't you? Do quizzes and all that kind of stuff, just to keep people in touch with each other. But yeah, certainly the ability to actually speak to people face to face rather than having to constantly phone or email or Skype or Zoom or whatever, that has taken its toll, I think, on everybody. And getting out of this is definitely got to be the main thing. I don't think we've got any more questions at the moment. So unless anybody else had any more comments to add, then we'll be looking to wrap up the session. I would just mention that there is a CPD reference for anybody who's keeping their CPD records up to date. There is a CPD reference for this event, which is now on screen. It's 3668415. Obviously, that will be included in the link that comes out to everybody who's attended. So you'll be able to log that on your CPD records. I think it just remains really for me to say a massive thank you to our three presenters. You've been absolutely brilliant today. It's just so on topic and so needed. And I'm really great that we've been able to put this together. And thank you for all your time and effort in supporting IWFM and the broader community across the islands.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Very welcome.